Welcome you viewers to the Energies of Days 83 with Alexander Wagand. And shortly before Christmas, it's the last show in the year 2015. I'm 1 century back. It's an interesting year. The next year would be also interesting. We got many interesting news. I want to say at the start of the show something, because I always again have people that say, why have we this monarch butterfly as a logo? I show it again. I have brought 3 butterflies with me. This is our logo. And this and that are... One of this is a monarch. Maybe you can zoom a little bit. Then you can see all 3. And here the viewers can decide themselves which of them is a monarch and which not. So it's only one. It's difficult to say. So the experts that say that this is a monarch, you can see, okay, the color orange is partially orange, partially yellow, but here are the white spots and some patterns that in the stylized butterfly are not there. So here the wings are parted, this goes up here to the head and this to the mid of the body of the butterfly. Well, it is different. And it's just a drawing of a butterfly that we have, and we didn't on purpose choose the monarch butterfly. So, but the chances are 50-50 who says which of those 2 is the monarch really. You can say the big one or the small one. So it's just, I'm surprised because people pretend to be butterfly experts, but it's tricky. There are so many kinds. And they ask, why did you choose the monarch? So we didn't. And you can search things everywhere, the red and the blue of the chairs. You could say there's the Freemason colors. So if you search things, you always find things. I think you should point to that if you start looking at symbols, see how are they bundled. It's the best way. If I see a singular gesture at people or a sign that I want to point to things, then it has to be clear that those signs are used inflationary in many parts. Also often had become standard. For example, if you use certain signs that are offered in computer programs, then those are standard signs, and you find many signs that meanwhile land there maybe on purpose, that are used by certain groups. And Joe, I'd like to add that the butterfly isn't guilty, isn't to blame for what qualities people appoint to it. You didn't say it. For those who don't know, what about the monarch? Well, it's used in mind control at MK Ultra, apparently as a symbol. And of course, they use it. But I know butterflies from nature and see in them symbol for change, because from the caterpillar that cannot fly, through the process there is an astonishing change into a flying butterfly. And that's the best sign for change for me. But when we speak about change and symbols and accumulation of those, sometimes it's obvious. When we are at Christmas, I got a fax of somebody, maybe twice, 666 euros for the children's home and youth home. It's a newspaper from Duisburg. 666 filled boots waited for children. So twice 666 is, I think, 1,332. They written it this way, and the 666 boots with sweets. Maybe it could be by accident. There is a row of signs that encounter us, and the bigger part is just coming into the world out of the energetical qualities without the purpose of the doing person. And this is just an expression of this time. And the 666 plays a big role. If you see cars with such license plate, for example, it occurs very often. And if the person means to express as a rebel or rock and roll people or provoking spirit, or if there are other reasons you can say with difficulties. The same with other issues. You can quickly ease a basic idea too much and jump over the relevant things. So look closer to this if you deal with such. And we have the 21st of December. They celebrated the sun change for that, and the churches came then and introduced Christmas as a celebration some days after that. What's the meaning for you? Well, as children you have a connection with the Christmas tree, and it's today much consumption. Wouldn't be the sun change big the light celebration or the solstice is a big issue, and there are many things to say about that. Maybe we are quickly in old Egypt, in the pre-Roman time, where they celebrated this. But in the Roman history also we could deal with this issue and find many according things. So this issue seems to draw those people back that deal with it into a less manipulative world, but a world that's more related to nature. That's an important aspect, because we are getting always more distance to nature. The quality of light that falls after summer down to darkness, the days that get shorter, it expresses here something that is connecting us to the body warmth of the sun that provides life, that you connect the body warmth with the warmth of the sun. But there's also a conceptual level to be found behind that, and it's a little bit like in other issues. You start to deal with the subject, maybe with the legal situation currently, and then you mean quickly, then 150 years ago it had been wonderfully. But if you look further, then you even realize that you can look much deeper into there, that you always can get much more back. So to get to the natural, you have to look very far behind, into the past. And it's a nice clue still when we speak about this quality, even if the weather isn't so we have the surroundings that's associated with Christmas in our culture. So some people say, you see climate change now, but warm weather doesn't maybe have to be with the climate, have to do, or the human-made climate change. It's another subject, which are theories where people earn money from and impose new laws about the CO2 reduction. So if it would be at least laws, these are no laws. This is basically, I don't want to talk about the legal definition for laws, but these are just changes of terms. That fits better, and it shows points into a direction that obviously will approach us with a bigger velocity. Yes, at the beginning we talk about the energies normally, and normally say it's a quiet time before Christmas. So sense something, sense yourself, and this is what they say. I don't concentrate on Iraq or Syria, but I recollect what I perceive with my senses. So there are this collection inside, and in German it's the sense. And the sense is the being, we at the being. And to discover the relevant things is in this time not only important, but also in resonance with the energetical qualities of this time. And these energetical qualities are taken from us on many parts by making them something profane. And if you look around in the supermarkets, you don't see the Easter eggs yet, but the Christmas things you don't see. You see since September, since many months. This means that that they want to make the reference to that a little bit more profane, and this works partially, and they rename Christmas even sometimes since years. In the USA they don't speak of Christmas but of holidays or Xmas. We see here obviously an attempt to erase the things that are lying behind. It's important that we speak about that. And I've got something else with me that I want to address really. We have so many issues, it can happen that things get lost, but I want to address at the start, and you can remind me if I would still forget it. But it fits maybe better to the end of the show and the moment we realize enormous acceleration, even if the people that seem important in the theater play. So the people that want to prepare like new stages, new structures in this theater play, those people get really nervous, it seems, and many things are very quickly moving, and many people change the stage very quickly. And one thing I anticipated recently in the podcast, what we see now is a scenario that has a long prehistory. And this long prehistory is, I don't speak of some decades, not even of some centuries, but we speak of millennia in reality. And now there's something moving to a point that the wet dream of many in these structures, where people that see themselves as architects, that they celebrate that there's something that come, but in such long terms leads into these directions. And now, in the last days, you could say, to stay at this picture, very quickly they wanted to order things that it would still work. And in this context, I'd like to say, those last things that happen are very risky. So what has to be done now is especially risky because it can be perceived and seen through by many more awakening peoples, and it will be always in the contradiction to things they explained to us in the last decades. So they take a big risk, and they get hectic. And people want to do things with us, but it depends on if people allow this. And Christmas time is a good time to sense in yourself what the relevant things for me are in life. It forces you say that try to force plans to finish those old plans that ripe within millennia, and now within months they want to complete this. This cannot work. No. And it's not constructed in the way that it should. Imagine you would wait for a certain date in the future, or were conditioned to that, like a big celebration. And the celebration is not planned years before, but decades before. There are calculations made into which hour what has to happen, who is to invite, how the people sit, which music is played, and now, at once, imagine that's the date is right now in front of the door. If you plan for such a long time, you won't have to work in the last days because all is prepared. You would look around, walk around, see if it's all right, and order tables and so on. Maybe you do it 10 times that nothing goes wrong in the last days. But here it's like the guest stand in front of the door and the food isn't ready. The music isn't there. So all is hectically reconstructed. This is my picture. And I want to point to that. It's enormously important to sense that because we sense this too. So the enormous energetical movement that takes place here, we sense it, even we who are not introduced to those plans, but we sense them internally. And it's important to separate this and to say that this unrest and this feeling that things would have to happen now, that's not important for me, but it's decisive for me, things that should be completed by others now. But it's not this is not my issue. I should just take care of it. I would further develop and not what they want. So it's a nice hint. What we sense is hectic, and if you think we should do anything because things are not running well, but basically you won't have to do things. You can stay at yourself, because others that try something and they don't make it, we'll always see it in the news. The time where they, in the last minute, try to force an outcome. This is what we see in almost every of our news here. And what is said to the drive to do things. So the one or the other one might be important to do things they haven't done within years, over years. But all we say here is can quickly be not only misunderstood, but also is seen from your own point of understanding. So if you regard things in a year, then if you see things in a year, then you would say maybe, well, things get obvious to me that hadn't been present for me before. I didn't perceive that. And this is the resonance in your own development. So when I say things, I say it for them, for those, this point is important. But what you point to, many people sense it only internally with an unrest. And this lets us swing forth and back and shakes us through. It's good to speak about that, because then what we sense we can regard in a little bit different way, like, it would be another perspective, and maybe I could be more at peace with that. And so it should be. And at the end we talk about how we deal with that, because always again, I know it from the viewers, they have the question, what should I do with that? Because there are so many news and hints. It's a help to see that you're not alone. There are other people who sense it in a similar way. And you can say, oh, I maybe don't need to worry that much. Won't matter anyway. Things happen that happen. That's it. So let's get into the news. Yeah, I want to say something of my own, because we have an unorthodox entry to this. We just directly jumped in. What's good. In February, in the new year, I have the first convention in Bad Meinberg from the 12th to the 14th February, and it's this meeting is like representing many things that could get important to us in the next year. This to get to know your state and yourself, and to see things with awakened eyes, and awake, and to see things through what should happen to us and how obvious things are, and then at the moment it becomes like an important watch, like in a science fiction movie, but you don't have to participate anymore. So this voluntariness they impose on us, we have to recognize it and then say no. And this becomes more important. Evermore. I have a perfect entry to this news. We had it with signs and symbols. I show what I brought. I am a mentor. I am your mentor. Picture, you can see it's from which newspaper? Fulda again. Frankfurter Rundschau newspaper. So 10 years, the Star Wars fans await a new episode. I am your mentor. Showed it again. So we have an interesting picture with the headline, I am your mentor. The Star Wars. Actually in the film he says, I am your father, Luke, but I am your mentor, that's maybe wanted. Yeah, it's a thing that is interesting to see on the back side. Here's Darth Vader brings good news. Thanks to the Star Wars saga, the toys industry is being glad. So here the story is explained that people can consume more, and this figure has to land on the toy tables. Darth Vader, like the Dark Father. Yeah, it's a symbol. He lands landing on the donation tables for Christmas. And you see like a Wehrmacht helmet for that those words. So cliches are linked like to us when we get news from the right scene and they show skinheads. Yeah. By the way, those skinheads had been at the same time as the long-haired hippies, you could say, like the counter movement. They derived from the hooligans, the British football hooligans. They had been used like that. So if you see the Third Reich, you won't see any skinheads there with bomber jacks or pilot's boots. And those pictures are very powerful, and they should evoke something in us. And this picture also should evoke something in us. And there's another reference. Please show it again. That's the picture to the toys fair. So here the little ones are connected with those pictures, and such pictures show provoke in ourselves certain worlds of imagination. And you talked about the Force. Yeah, the Force is strong in you. If you hear it in the trailer, I haven't seen the new movie yet, but it's a subject. Well, basically, the Force in us, we can find it. Yeah, the own power of the self. If we don't give our power of Force to persons like this. And in the word power, or there's like the word attention, self-respect, and carefulness. So these are important qualities of force, of the power. If you take them away, then something else becomes out of that. So the issue of force, power, is important now. It's present. It's about borders, about crossing or overrunning borders, or our own area. We can see our own issues differently now, and it's important to turn our view to the inside and see that we don't see stable things in the outside, but have to find it inside of us. This has become important to us in this time now. Well, you addressed an issue. I don't know if it's our next subject. So in the area where we are, actually we should draw our borders, but we are not allowed to. And actually there's always conveyed a bias to us. I don't know if this is an issue, but we'll get back to that. But so it's well to be seen in those two newspaper news from that like 2 days apart. At the 23rd of November, as crimes through immigrants don't rise, and in the news 2 days after, crimes are strongly rising through refugees. And this is a total contradiction. So we see that there are problems, but as soon we address this, we are racist. And well, this is a good example. I had also noticed that, and people sent that to me. I thought of bringing it, but I'm glad that you point to that, because it's a basic technique that's used everywhere in the media, psychologically. Yeah, by bringing contradictory news or collapsing news. There's news with that says A, that's presented in the media over some days or weeks, and then a totally contrary statement B comes. That leads to that we have to feel insecure, and this insecureness leads to that many people say, I don't understand that. I let the politicians deal with that. And there's a voluntariness in again when you think, well, if this party doesn't it, then I elect the other one. But it doesn't matter. And I legitimize people with that, where I think they can do it better. And that's the danger of giving away our own force. So take your own force on, accept it in yourself. So the issue with the collapsing news is also what you say on this very material level to be found. When I say, okay, I have no understanding of this, but it brings big insecureness into us to not understand the world. This is wanted. So it's not about this singular case or about the political level, but it's basically about that we are brought into a state where we, as a conclusion, conclude that I don't understand that. And this in a way that's not healthy. Because if you really would recognize that you are confused and insecure, then it's very precious. So when you recognize that yourself, so when people say in my seminars they're confused, then I say that's great, because only if you're confused then you can sort things. But if I think that my reality, my truth is true, then it's no. But this kind of confusion leads you into an artificial construct that, by offering you a solution that others can do it better, and this world is to improve permanently. This is an assumption that gives many politicians the pseudo-legitimation to do things for you. And there you are also already in voluntariness and in contract and in being dependent. Yeah, you addressed that this could be an induced psychopathic constellation. So at the one news that we make that, and the other news is we don't make it. This makes you crazy, and this is aimed so that you are stuck like in a pendulum that never comes to rest. And I would like to say this is a very old rhetorical technique, and you find it in the old Rome. And it was they used to give confusion as an explanation for the people without education, that they shouldn't educate themselves. And there's a little side jump. we should link this excellent video with a link that we provide. There is a wonderful answer to an article of a foundation or association that is supported by the federal government and explains the empire citizens, the so-called. All that is said there is a lie, so it's a clear, definite lie, and this video shows it in deep rest and peacefully explained. And there we see something that's important for the now understanding. We consciously are being lied to, but those that read these news, they pre-impose that people should be informed via this news, and this should we also understand. So those contradictory news get only then understandable that when I get that I'm lied to, then clarity arises. And then I say, well, then they come with this lie and the other lie. So normally both varieties are wrong and the truth is in between. And this has to be understood by people who read news different than before. So because then they can become an instrument, a wonderful instrument that helps us what they want to sell us and why. And if then it works good, then puzzle pieces can get together that show us a more important picture. It gets more important to us. Have you got news that show that fit to that? Yeah, I would. What I have here is news that I came to. I wanted to enter with a big issue, but still come back to those manipulations. But I don't want to bring them now. I thought we enter with a big issue, if you want. And I basically, of course I said something about refugees, but I decided to enter with another issue. Because this issue is permanently present everywhere, that maybe there are other issues get lost, that we don't, it could be also intended. So, another point. People draw my attention to that we speak so little about the solar energies. This I want to cover now and explain that. So when you look at the NASA numbers, then we have a very strong and active sun with strong radiation, and it fits to this time, to the energy. But I am very critical what those published numbers are. I'm much more critical than before. So I'm very timid to pass those numbers on and to believe those figures. I will report when I'm clearer to this than now. I have a big subject. I read ECB, European Central Bank, prepared for the case that the heaven falls onto us, onto our heads. That's the headline. That's from German economic news, and here ECB, so European Central Bank, is prepared for the case that heaven falls upon our heads. The question is, who are we? So we means, of course, that it affects us all, including those who might now read that. That's the one level. But of course, it could also mean us. This means us, the ECB. The European Central Bank sees difficult times, but is strong. The problem, the states have more debts and leave the solution to the ECB. So that's very childish. Yeah, what does the ECB? Where does it come from in its authority? Who has granted it its authority? And has it been granted authority at all? That's another question. Interestingly, later, I have a news here that with the Ukraine, they are very grateful to the Ukraine. They gave them credits without secureness, and they say who is liable for that. It's the citizen or the one who is, it's us, basically. Because here the subject of guarantor comes in. So it's further the politics of the cheap money, according to the ECB, hits its limits. We still have ammunition, but the effect would be much bigger if the necessary reforms would be made. So if we hear we are ammunition and there's martial turns, and this fits very well, because in fact it seems so, and I express myself carefully, as if there would be something like a war between the European structures and the, for example, the American structures. And this is what we see, and there are interesting hints that we can share that lead us a little bit into economy, but have a deep symbolics and are signs. I recently made a podcast around this issue, only for members, around the ECB decision, central bank decision, and it's normally not my energetical issue. So I know about the illusion behind that, but it's an interesting sign that was connected to that. And I wanted to point the direction, the attention to that. I like to deepen this within 3 to 4 minutes. What happened? So is this battle real for you? Well, in the last consequence, it's just a played structure. The doll players play both dolls. That's of course no question for me. But in this context, Russia also has to be seen, and China also. But still, we experience here a theater play in that the fight, even if it's led or nourished by the same powers, it still becomes present on stage. And we realize effects and should realize effects. So we could take that seriously, even if we know it's wanted and it's made finally. So after like 7 years of zero interest rates at the American Federal Reserve Bank, we've seen something now that should be a change. So this slightly risen interest rates. So we had before between 0 and 0.25%, and now we got between 0.25 and 0.5. So actually between 0 and 0.5. So we still got this room and this area. But it's still a signal, and it's a dangerous signal. But that was inevitable. I want to point to some levels. It's funny because on one hand it's a very material level, a level full of manipulation, and still there's much truth to be recognized behind that. So the other one option would have been a negative interest rate. You mean a minus interest rate? Yeah, that would have been very bad for the system. Like they admit they are broke. So they want to emphasize that the USA are recovering economically, that they are economically upwards. So, but to say it obviously, the USA are falling into a recession, into in an incredible speed, and are everything else but. And all non-manipulated numbers show they show catastrophical economic situation of the United States. No question. But if people expect a signal in such form and months or years say that such signal would come, then they would lose credibility if they don't deliver a little bit, and this was the least they could deliver. But it's still catastrophical for the USA and what will happen there. So, still the things that they are cutting off like the littlest impulses that have been there. But the signal didn't have maybe the effect they wished, and on a childish level it's like a assumed signal or not a real signal. But it's also a signal on the other level, on another level. It's a signal that shows how quickly they want to accelerate things. Do they want to keep up the system for a long time, or do they want to sacrifice it already? So I understand that with this decision they've shown that they have taken a long fuse, but they started the process. And in the next time many things would become visible, like in China, and the news say that they expect that the heaven would fall on our head, and that what had been present until now isn't valid anymore, and that something unforeseeable and non-calculable could happen. But it's not heaven or sky that falls on our earth, but that the system gets under pressure. The system where it should break gets under pressure. And they started that, but slowly. I said 7 years they kept the interest in that, and it had been the first interest rate since 9 years, but we are at 0 to 0.25 since 7 years. Yeah, like the 7 fat and 7 poor years. So we see the handwriting of the Vatican. The Vatican determines much more than we think. Also there. So what I see, it's simplified. It's not only the Vatican. So there are 3 crowns: Vatican, Holy Chair, and the Holy Father. And what happens here is an influence. So this 7 jumps upon us if we look more closely. Yeah, we started in September or 4 September. So this year, this 7 times 7 years, that there some things could happen, and economically no big things had happened, but this strangely was the time where we had this with the refugees where it started. So there are powers that for the 7 times 7 years are that use them and believe in them and the symbolism, and want to create those happenings that would confirm what they hope for. So here it's like in science, they help a little bit that it fits. They bring explanations or bring powers in or rename powers, forces. So if you in science can't explain things, you can name a force and make it responsible for that. It's very creative. And this happens also in other parts. And it shows us which powers at the moment play themselves into the foreground and want to put themselves into the foreground. So we see here there are not is not one doll player, but this doll player has also a stick in its back and is steered by other forces or people. So if you would say the 7 years, there were no 7 fat years behind us. Some people have gotten profited from the last 7 years. But if we go back 7 years, we are in the year 2008. And in that year, the subprime crisis was very obvious. And if we go 7 years from that, back in 2001, there we have an interesting event that had thrown its shadows in front. Here we see sequels that are wanted, and we have to get conscious that our normal human form to watch times for our own life cycle can not bring understanding in this. So it goes much more back. We speak of thousands of years, at least 3,500 years. So what we see here are very old structures that even go much before Rome, maybe 5,000 years. Maybe we would have to deal with beings that have another lifespan than us. So if I would say if I gain much power in my life, it's great, but when I die, I don't have anything from that. Yeah, that's a good point. I want to answer that in a little bit parabolous way. If you see that in our human societies there are certain structures that made it over a bigger span than a normal cycle of human life. Like the Fugger traders, to not say other names, yeah. But you see those times are limited. Powers arise, powers go. But when we see certain structures, we realize that they are already pretty stable and that those structures barely could survive without other forces that support such structures. Yeah, well, everyone can think their part, but yeah, it's alright. We want to encourage our listeners to think. So, the ECB is prepared for the case that the sky falls on our heads. Should this calm us down? No, it's more like a hint. Things would happen there, and we've seen big crashes and crashes of big fund societies. And there are movements that the normal citizens don't perceive. And here's a view to the actual economy. You remember the Baltic Dry Index, we talked about that. Meanwhile, it has reached its deepest level. It had dramatically fallen. And it had last time it had been at 523, and now it's since the last show we came to 478, and here we have to see these are not only good 10%, but this is a value that is so deep already that it indicates that the ship companies cannot work anymore. And this was the case by 700 and 600 already. We have now a time before Christmas where things have to be transported by ship. So that's a big industry. They get their basic substances. They're not that much touched by Christmas business, but it still shows direction to the future. What's now ordered or not delivered shows that in the future not so many things are needed. And here it's like the world economy is standing on the brake pedal, even if they say something else. And that's a clue that fits here. Big protest from Russia. IMF ends credit regulations in favor of Ukraine. That's the news. I said that the ECB plays a role here. So basically those structures, of course, are connected. The IMF saves Ukraine from bankruptcy and changes its regulations for that purpose. And they don't speak of laws here. These are regulations. And these are, of course, only regulations. These are, I said it, these are terms, for example. The IMF is no state, but it's powerful, and it determines about how in certain states certain structures are handled. And when here saves Ukraine, then it's in reality it brings it into a much bigger dependence, and they want to do that. And of course, the influence they have on them by giving them better credit structures means it's wanted that the Ukraine is still working. Yeah, but it's dependent even more. So bankrupt states can get credits. And the IMF tries in this manner to save its credits that it pumped into the Ukraine. But that's only a part of the truth. You should always be careful if you read news that explain in one sentence why things happen that way. This might be one reason, but often it's only one, I don't see, ground reason. It's not the ground that we arrive at the end, it's only aspect of action. We invested already much. If we don't give something now, we have to write it off. Well, that's childish. Because also the credits before were given, although they knew that they would have to write them off. But that's the case anyway with many of those credits. I say it very obviously here, and there we see Russia is protesting, because there is of course the protest, because they know IMF, that's the International World Bank, very strongly by the English and the USA and the other NATO states used as an instrument, and it's an own instrument with an own claim of power that takes care of those structures, stay in a way or become like they want. It's like when we both build a house and finance it over the bank, and the bank have payment difficulties, and the bank says, well, Alexander, we give him more credit, and the Joe, oh, no, we have to have a foreclosure. Yeah, like in the history when we both are broke, as the basic of this story. Yeah, but when they expect things from the one or can favor a business on another part, then it's also in this level. This happens. There are people that are inside of the system are
tatsächlich hat der IWF mit dieser Entscheidung seine Rolle
that are preferred. And here in the news, the IMF had given up its role as a neutral institution. So we see here it's a role that the IMF had played, but this doesn't mean that they would still insist on this role on another part. So with the Ukraine, they can be a little bit more relaxed. But in other parts they point to that they are still independent. But that's nonsense, because we know it. The whole system is dependent on itself. This as an important hint for those who know that and think that the term conspiracy theory is something that provides a critical consciousness and emphasize it on those parts where other ones create only wild structures that have no substance. The entire system in that we find ourselves, political, church, structures, economy, it's interwoven. And this can lead to a pulling to the one or the other side, but in reality they are playing the same game. And they tell us that this game doesn't exist and that another structure would exist. If you don't get that, you're totally wrong. So from there it's not conspiracy theories, but interwoven practices, and being connected, that means, and interwoven means that there are structures that we don't know about, and we could use the term occult, and occult is what's hidden, and this is what's lying in front of us. So the IMF is, for most people, no occult structure, but it is, and this more than I want and can say it here. But I put it aside, but I want to stay at that issue, because I have two or three economic issues that I want to conclude. So here's a news from the Welt newspaper. The yuan quake is the Chinese currency. They can send it to Germany, and Chinese government lets its currency fall down. And German enterprises are suffering. So here, China is presented as a relentless player that endangers others. It would hit us, but in reality it's the dollar that gets into big problems now. Also, the game against the euro is not as running as good as intended. So here's another hint, like connection to the dollar loosened. This is possible because in the last months the basis have been laid of that. The Chinese yuan course orientated on the dollar, but Beijing lost this connection. To explain this is a farce, because it is no strong dollar. That would be a problem for the Chinese currency. But this being connected and hanging at the dollar, this gets dangerous if the dollar would collapse. And I also mentioned that the Swiss franc was hanging so close at the euro that couldn't breathe anymore. And this is something that the Chinese don't want to risk. For the dollar, it's enormously dangerous. It's like at the edge of a knife. We experience a dangerous action here of the Federal Reserve with a raise, and even if it's this little raise in interest rates, the smallest one that's possible anyway. But there are other options that the Fed can draw. For example, a new quantitative easing with big amounts of money. It's still possible, but it is a signal for the market participants that the American economy is not strong. And this impression, they want to avoid that. And the Welt newspaper, as the mouth of the transatlantic bridge, say to the Chinese, well, don't do that. They got enormous dollar reserves, and they are have the biggest claims to the USA by having bought treasuries in big amounts. And if they would sell them, they would lead to a big problem of the system, USA, of course. Yeah, and then other ones would also abandon their treasury and dollars. Yeah, they would have to sell them because the values drop down, and this means what they have in their own portfolios would lose even more value, more worth. And but this is also a very absurd illusion. These papers don't have value at all. This game is just driven further to a point where it's not playable anymore. But also this moment is something that doesn't only happen from a consciousness arising, but it's on purpose. But it shouldn't happen in a stadium where consciousness arising is present, because otherwise they would, the powers would not be able to explain it. Could you explain it with compared to a Monopoly game? And at the end, that the people that permanently lose, that they stand up and say, I don't play anymore? Is this the danger that the game can be played to a bitter end? Yeah, so what you say is wonderful, because it describes very well an aspect, and that's a big aspect, a worldwide aspect. I say world and not earth, because we speak of the artificial system of the world, and this expresses very well how this game is running. But different than in the Monopoly game, the winner shouldn't become that visible and shouldn't become that easily recognizable, that the hopelessness in the game would be realizable by everyone. Yeah, well, we are like in a situation where we have got maybe 3 players who have the park speed and the stations and hotels. So when there are three strong players, then we think, well, it's still a good game, because it's not one. But in the end, they also will lose. It goes faster. It goes faster that one stays left. Then it's obvious, and then in the process they know where the rabbit runs. And, well, it cannot surprise us. That's something we get used to that. There's only one winner. That's what they say us. And the second one, that's a loser. Yeah, that's a loser, they say. He hasn't become the first one. And this is taught us in school and in the whole system of society. And in extreme forms you can see it every time again. If someone is really focused on winning and lets everything else out of the view, then he will lose in many other parts. But they sell it to us as attractive, and you see it in shows like one person becomes talent or superstar or whatever. And this doesn't surprise us, so they get us used to that we like those games, as long as we have the chance to find our place in that game. And this is the game that's played with us, and this is different, but the rules are strongly changed at the moment. But there's another hint. In fact, we are voluntarily in this game, in the structures integrated, even if this voluntariness is an assumption really, because a real freedom looks different. But we could exit out of a game if we don't supply it anymore, if we don't put any more energy into this and don't accept those players. It's enormously important. Maybe the most important thing you could say to that we give acknowledgement. We acknowledge the other one who puts this play upon us, but we don't need to do that. And maybe we shouldn't do that, and that's a solution. And we see it with colorful flowers that come out of the earth, or Joe Kreisel from Austria says, well, I'm a human being, I don't take part in your games in some places. But this has limits, and I don't mean the access of the playing person to things, but we are connected still in many parts to the game. So it means people should be determined to cut off all connection from this game, but we realize at the moment that we don't have the energy anymore, and this happens differently with different persons. We have different options to exit this game, and they will get conscious to us in many ways, but we must find them ourselves. No one else can do that for us. And it means that we acknowledge this forces or recognize them, those forces at the moment, and this is by our attention. So if I draw my attention to somebody or something, then I give this energy, and people on stage get the energy by the attention. But if all people would put their attention aside and say, well, I'm taking care of my own well-being, let them be there, would that change the game? And this acknowledgement of these forces? Well, that's a really big issue. There are so many things depend on that. We have in this game different regulations and different scenarios, and the acknowledgement plays plays a big role in the maybe strongest matrix structure that we find us, and in the levels beneath that. So we can see it, a recognition, when someone goes in front of court and says, well, to the judge, I'd like to have your legitimation. in Germany. Yeah, these are no real judges. Yeah, so we could. The judge wears a suit that brings him the recognition, and he says, "Do you recognize me as a judge?" Or this is pre-assumed. But if you don't do that anymore, if you don't recognize him that way, then funny things happen. But you are not very well off if you don't know the rules, really. So you have to be careful with that and recognize that this person here is ready to play a game, but I don't want to take part in this game. It's something else than when I say to him, your game doesn't exist. And this is what they normally do. So if I go into confrontation, it's not wise to say your game is nonsense, but you must say I don't play your game anymore. It's different. It would be even more wise to say I have no connections to your game, and this needs understanding, and this happens in many levels right now. So some are on this level here, and others are more consequent or radical, but normally in the middle the right measures to be found. Very interesting hint, when people can think things from that. Yeah, let's continue. When you look to England, in the English Parliament or in English courts, you see the structures much more obvious than here. You could say they have more tradition, but in reality you see the old structures. You see the roots better. This is very interesting. If you start looking for old structures to find them, then you find them where they are still to be found, and this you find in the English Parliament, and they're strangely formulated on many parts. When, for example, a minister starts to speak, he says, the president says, I recognize the minister. And this means I recognize him in his function. And here the function is put into the center, and with this the recognition. And from this we can learn much, how structures are stabilized. And if we don't take part in that anymore, give no energy in it anymore. Yeah, you mentioned it before court or with the police. Is my passport recognized, or if the policeman doesn't recognize it, I have another passport, and they say, can you show me your passport, please? Can I recognize you? And that's a big field to question this game or to realize it's a game. Yeah, in former times the policeman had to put his cap on, and he had to do it because that made him a policeman. And this leads to many other structures. But here we can see he wishes to be recognized as a policeman, and with that acknowledged. And you could say the uniform would make me a policeman, but you could get a uniform somewhere else. Yeah, and this is not standing in relationship to you. So this uniform expresses reference to a certain... now we hear the police sirens in the background. And there are many varieties of police now, like the order office with police tasks, or the federal police, or the city police, or the police, as we could show it. The Federal Reserve Bank has its own police, with own police cars. So here just they express it in which legal relation the policeman is standing, or officer is standing. And if you stand in this relation is another question. But if you say to him, show me your license, then you can't say that this is nonsense. But of course, game is nonsense, but it's there. It's a fiction, but it is there. But it doesn't mean that you have to play along. And this changes our behavior. This could lead us far again, but we have given the hint about a recognition or acknowledgement in the when the policeman reads your rights, he says, "Do you understand?" That this means standing under. Do you stand under what I said? In these terms, we realize when you speak of a recognition, or if we underwrite something, or if we sign something, so the signature is like a recognition of a liability, or like that. And if those structures seem to be self-explaining, we don't realize that we voluntarily recognize certain structures, so that we see them, we recognize them, but we have to see them through and see their sense. If you like, we could enter the refugee subject, because that's an enormously big subject with many facets. This news was sent to me from Austria. Austrian Gazette for Global Social Movements, it's called. I think it's a union magazine. And this union magazine, in a special news, it's almost only reported about this refugees movement. We could draw many news from that, but that we have limited time, I just want to show the outer page, cover page, and the cover is something that can be an important hint. Like here, you see the nowadays time witness. We the people, the nowadays time witness. Where we see the child behind the fence, the poor child, everyone is worried. But if I grip on this picture, I say here's an ancient form of manipulation that's presented to us. Suffering with someone, this should lead us to an action where we feel compelled to help. And helping organizations around the world live from that, from begging for our help. And I want to point to that you deal with the subject, you can find incredible things. I remember Haiti. I remember billions of donations of money that there had been given to a not even founded society of former President Bush, and that not even a little part, but a little part of a little part seemed to arrive in Haiti. So here it has to be clear to us that those concepts where they ask for help, they are often abused. Like the Red Cross in Haiti, they built 6 houses from the donations and got billions of sums. And much of this billions flew to other somewhere else. And the children disappear in Haiti. We could talk about that. That there, where you say, where they demand compassion and give the people the sense that they are also guilty, but you have to donate, and the donations don't land there. It's manipulation. You can basically say as usual. Yeah, not always, but as usual, or how very often this happens. And the word compassion, in German, with suffering, along suffering, has a double effect. So there are suffering animals often shown to us by newspapers that on other parts don't report about the permanent scandal about that. But to produce suffering is also a form of releasing energetical movement. But I want to get to the rhetorical level, because of this compassionate level, they quickly have a generalization. Like, here someone is suffering, so we have to help. So the question where the suffering came from is not asked. And where does the suffering have its original, maybe to be changed, structures? This question is not put. And it's generalized, and it's abused, and it leads to that a general solution is sold to us, so we have to do this or that. And this happens at the moment in a radical way, and if you don't know that, if you're well-believing, if you are just cannot imagine that, then you will be entrapped again like thousands of years ago. And these are rhetorical tricks they applied also in the old Rome, that are explained in books in this time, and they are used in this time one-to-one nowadays. In the same way, there are always recurring structures you can see. There's a book about that. Guido Wissmann, he's called, I think. I think I still have that book. Revolustics. Called unethical rhetoric. But there are old Roman books that point to that, and it's one of the oldest tricks. I don't want to say that there's no suffering, or that it's not a good quality to be empathic, but we should not automatically deal with the predefined solutions automatically, but exactly look to if this solution has to do anything with the issue, and if this is a real solution. When they prescribe us where we should have compassion and where we should help. So the refugees from the eastern Ukraine are not brought into our attention. They seem to prescribe us who are the good ones and the bad ones. Where should the compassion flow, and not the evil one is sitting in Russia or wherever, or how it just fits. The compassion is demanded or rejected. And what you just said, that the self-picture is really obviously our self-picture of ourselves is very much influenced in that way, and it's especially for the Germans. And we get at the moment enormously many hits with many old, very old energetical tricks and plots. And everyone has to decide if you get into resonance with that, or if you really would let yourself deprived by such cheap ways to prevent it to get your standing point. And we are pushed into a corner where they allow us to be, and they don't talk about these plans. One of those plans can be read wonderfully out of this news. Maybe you want to read it from German economic news. Merkel, open borders are important for the life of Germany. Yeah, important for the life of whom and for which Germany. So Angela Merkel rejects the return to national borders. No one needs open borders as well as Germany. Well, if you continue with that, before I continue with that, I'd like to start at this, Merkel is quoted, open borders are important for the life of Germany. So she doesn't speak about the Federal Republic. So this news would seem strange if they would say open borders are important for the Federal Republic, or for Germany. They speak of Germany here, not of the Federal Republic. And you have to understand that Germany is concludes a territory. That's important to understand, but only if you read the next sentence. Angela Merkel rejects the return to national borders inside of the EU. So there are no anymore. You have to say this clearly. She rejects the return to borders. So she has already gone away from that. So there are no national borders anymore. If there are no borders anymore, then the land, the country, vanishes, because it is defined by its borders and its territory. In other words, where does your territory begin, Joe? So, but if all borders are away, you could say, well, there are still the property conditions, but those are defined about the borders in the state, and they seem already to be abolished. Angela Merkel rejects the return to national borders inside of the EU. No country does need open borders as well as Germany, as much as Germany. So here's an explanation made. Here's just a statement made without explanation, only common talking. So this is why open borders have to be pushed through in the EU. And here's a further rhetorical means of style. When I create justification as a proof, so once again, no country needs open borders as well as Germany, and this is why other countries should open their borders. So there's just a statement made, no one needs open borders as much as Germany, and because this is so, open borders have to be pushed through in the EU, but there's no explanation for the first. Why is it important? So this is so, and this is why the first thing is important, and this is why the second thing is important. We want to bring the European mills to start with that. From 1,000 delegates, only 2 voted against that. And Angela Merkel defended her course in the refugees politics. And for that, on the CDU in Karlsruhe, we have the Karl the Big, that had Karl the Great, Charles the Great, that had never existed, who had ridden 200,000 kilometers in his life to Spain, to Italy, and brought European thoughts everywhere. An idea that the monks left us. It's a nonsense. There are no traces of this Charles. By the way, there would be much more to say about that. At the CDU party conference in Karlsruhe, she got standing ovation. Germany would be a leading country in Europe, and this talk has been just as flat as the other talks. But if here a party stands up and applauds for 9 minutes, and we see an inscenation that we find elsewhere in China and maybe former times of the Soviet Union and maybe Northern Korea. So it's a farce. They want to demonstrate, we the pre-thinkers, the elite, we are all of the opinion that what Angela Merkel says here is correct. That's, of course, not the case. It's a Casper theater of ugly figures, and what we can see here is a farce. And this has to be clear to us. Always then, when it's exaggerated, then it's a good clue to be curious, to be mistrusting. If they applaud Miss Merkel for 9 minutes, then something cannot be right. Even if you realize that before, otherwise the people who ask how it should be financed, then they don't mean Seehofer. there had been representatives, they asked questions, and they were put aside when they just asked how can this be financed. Money is lacking everywhere, and the one who asked that had been screamed down. And what we see here is a cheap farce, an inscenation, and it shows everyone who can see what this is. Here we can see it. Making it too good, this becomes obvious. You can easily see through this that it's a cheap, very cheap inscenation. But the message, open borders are important for life, and that there are no national borders anymore, according to Merkel, that's an important information for us, because it shows where it should go. And very obviously she had left the borders open instead of saying we should at least register who comes in. And these are facts that have been made. Afterwards they can discuss, but I think there are numbers, I don't know, 90% are not registered who arrived here. And this means the open borders, this will change, but the open borders, this will change. Let's talk about this issue, it's very interesting. In the USA, there we have a very different situation. If you fly into the USA, maybe into holiday, you are checked there. If you are allowed to travel to the country. Always more. Your laptop can be taken away at the airport. There, it's checked what you say, where you come from, what your history is. When you want to travel to Canada, it's the same procedure. When you want to go to England, but here we have open borders. It's very interesting. But on the other hand, there are also people traveling, they come illegally to the country, also in America. What there becomes important is that they are registered. And by registration, we don't have the time to talk about this for long, but something happens that replaces the missing birth certificate for the financing. We already talked about that financings are made by the system through the birth certificate. So every citizen is dealt with. And when many people come in here, no matter how, they should be registered actually. And in USA we see it more beautiful because the terms are to be found one-to-one. The birth certificate is not called document but certificate. And the certificate is holder's bill. You got only the you can only have a copy of this, and we have a stock number on that, on the original. And they issue the body even. And if someone is controlled in the country and registered, then a pledge is entered. Lien, it's called. A lien. Alien. A lien. Isn't it interesting? A lien. And this registration, I think we will see it, but only when facts are made. What we can realize here is that those people that come into the country now originally had been as refugees, would have run through a process where you consist if they have a claim, but they don't speak of this anymore. So it's about how those people are integrated now, where they should live, in which villages they maybe should get integrated. So we experience here that a total change in the dealing with those had happened within weeks, unrecognized and relatively unrecognized, and what had been valid law, and I say not valid but applied law, it's stepped over totally. It doesn't play a role, but it had been decided in this way. And this shows us where we stand and how this all runs. So I have an example from Sweden. The soldiers from barracks had to move into the forest, and the refugees get by day 62 euros, and they try to provide Arabian food, and the barracks in Elwalden is inhabited by refugees, and the soldiers had to move into the forest, and Martin Idin, boss of the forest, of the barracks, said that soldiers should deal with that. It's the structures we can see. It's an energetical and symbolic and quality. So we see what happens here, and many people are very much in unrest. And I have, after last time at the Energies of the Days, after that I had a seminar and being together, and I can share that there have been many people that are affected now more than before. They feel affected, and they realize which changes are happening here, and it's unoverseeable. I brought another news, Joe, that fits to that. You put the other one aside that we just had. That was from the 14th, from the 15th maybe. Here I have an older news, but I consciously brought it into this order to show this up. So here it is, at the 12/12, Merkel wants to use the refugee crisis for the abolishment of the state borders, and it was not done then, but 2 days later. So Angela Merkel wants to use the refugee crisis for the building of the United States of Europe. The national borders should be totally vanish. With that, not the borders should vanish, but the states should vanish. They would be declared as countries, and then only made certain structures. That's what we find everywhere already. That had happened to Italy. That happened to Germany with the singular states within Italy and in Germany in former times, and the same should happen to Europe now, to the whole of Europe. And the border protection will be EU competency and only happen on the outer borders. And that's an enormously important issue. We could talk about that because we can realize much with that. If we read this news, Merkel wants to use refugee crisis for the abolishment of the state borders. So here the state will vanish, that state that doesn't exist anymore anyway. And remember, some editions ago we spoke about it can't be in the interest of the system to tolerate an old national structure where people maybe have a claim even on, in the idea of a stateless new commercial system. And this system is already present, of course, but now it becomes visible. It should be made visible, and someone who relies on old nationalities stands in the way of this, and it's not wanted. And the velocity in that this happens now, within 2 days, the so-called German state borders, they're apparently somewhere else, to abolish them. It's an incredible procedure. So if you would have reported some months ago about that, it would have been declared as impossible. And now, it, by the way, said in the news with a 9-minute applause legitimated. Yeah, this is what we can see over centuries, the claqueurs of the powerful ones that make the prerequisites for this. But it gets even more interesting. Federal Chancellor Angela Merkel declines a protection of the German borders. She said in the interview for 2 newspapers it's an illusion to believe that we can solve the refugee problem at the German-Austrian border. The Chancellor said that no other country in Europe would profit as much from the free movement as the free moving inside of Europe. And why isn't explained? Because Germany isn't profiting at all. But it's enough to assume that. And students say that, and teachers and parents say that, and that's the mean thing, that not even an explanation, it's a pseudo explanation is needed to repeat things and vomit things out. And unfortunately this opinion becomes to declare this a pseudo common opinion that it really isn't anymore. Yeah, maybe they said we need specialized workers. And the last people, it's a woman in the job center said that we have enough workers, but we get them somewhere else, so that it is steered and it is artificially made, and it's a certain naivety that it's good you speak out on the part that many people still stand. It's about the abolishment of states. It's about the abolishment of the connected rights of the sovereign people, so that we in former times here it's further, after the introduction of the common currency, there now should come the abolishment of the common borders. The EU had been told by Merkel and Hollande to bring the EU is commissioned by Merkel and Hollande. A new common border troop should be there against the use against the will of the singular national state. This should happen within days. It's not only accelerating, but they have fear that they cannot control the sheep anymore. This is highly interesting because it leads us to the next news. I would like, if you allow me this monologue, Joe, give another hint. Under the headline, de Maizière finds it possible to hold refugees back. So it's side info in that about Frontex. Frontex is an agency. And this term of agencies is then understandable when you say it in English, agency. So we realize the same structures in the USA. NSA, Homeland Security, CIA, all agencies. They are like commercial agencies. And you know what they administer? Licenses. And these are our licenses. Driver's license, marriage license, license. All is licensed. And your structures are predefined with that. So you have no rights anymore, but you have to get a license. And this cannot work if there are states that have own legal structures. They have to fall. And that's the point. We see it wonderfully always then when we translate the terms. Frontex. It's the same. But if you look at agencies, these are agencies, we are full in commercial law and trade. And you said Frontex, the name alone is interesting because X and frontier, to abolish frontiers, at least in the region. Frontex means away, like a wheat X had been against plants, and people abused it and built rockets out of that. And this Frontex means borders away. But borders are useful when borders are where borders are used. But if you think borders are obsolete in this time of the 5th or 6th or 10th dimension, doesn't realize that borders and frontiers are just only the structures where our effects are just in this world just become possible. Our well, people say that the refugees, they do nothing bad, but there had been 50 arrests within 2 weeks in the refugee homes. There had been 13 incidents, and at the 1st of December, further 10, and there are from little causes a big potential of violence. And you can see that, but it's not in the news normally. There are people who count the local news about that to show that a lot of problems wait for us there. Braunschweig, asylum seekers terrorize the whole part of town. And there are two things that are important that can often are not important. So those people are lured from their own cultures, and they are abused themselves in the majority of cases. And they are, with a real evil thinking, under totally wrong assumptions, are lured here. What's an issue, what brings an issue up that we addressed many shows ago. I spoke about, Joe, that everything has its place here, but also the place is important, that it's here on the right place. And so we find radiating material in Earth that becomes dangerous when it's too close to the surface. So we find certain qualities in spices that in the real measure are really appropriate in soup or in pudding, but in pudding don't have something lost there. So we have some qualities that have their place. So you and me, we have our place, but it's told to us that this place isn't there, so that you would have to subordinate everywhere according to the new imaginations. That's not only for us, that's for all. And there are development processes and cultural contexts that are important also for the development of the singular person, that in this way should get undermined. So that's a big issue. I had been shopping with my wife, and I saw at the register a man who had been like a refugee, so not the former barracks somewhere near that had been used as a refugee shelter. And it was difficult for him to communicate, and the man at the register said, Iraq, I come Iraq, and it didn't really work, so he waved friendly, and he really tried to get into contact. And you realize how the singular person is abused and brought into a surrounding, so he's totally doesn't know what happens to him, what happens around him, what is said to the people, and it's nothing new. It happens since centuries, and we are also abused. And the best possibility to act is to find your own to claim your own space and to say what to say and to pronounce things, and don't let yourself forbid to say things from others without aggressiveness but with clearness. Very important. Here the CDU party hasn't done it. There was no contradiction, a big applause for Ms. Merkel, and CDU party has abandoned their resistance against the refugees politics. Is not only about refugees politics, it's about abolishing of borders and a new reconstruction of society, and this is what's wanted, and not by CDU, SPD or Green parties, but decided but describes a spot in time that it had been planned centuries and millennia ago. So here it's further on, it's not amazing, so people who don't agree have to suffer bad consequences, and who is surprising, for whom this is surprising, he hasn't gotten what happened before. I just want to show how obvious the structures get, and my last issue in the whole big context seems at first nothing to have to do with that, but it still brings obvious clarity. Look at this news. Whom does the space belong? So, since 50 years, there's international consensus that no nation can claim space. Now the USA had been declared like the administrator for outer space. And here we have to see something in this news. On the one hand, it's the hint to that since almost 50 years there's international consensus about that no nation has to have a claim on space. So it's interesting, there's another area on Earth where they also agreed on that there is no claim to the any nation. That's the open sea. Because here something arises that we can see here. It's maritime law. That here shows that this maritime law knows no borders, but is extending. Yeah, and if I find something like an island and I put my flag in there, or Joe Conrad or Big News Media, then this island would belong to me, according to maritime law. Would this be the same in space? So if the Americans would have been on the moon, would they then have a claim on the moon? That's a much more complex issue. I want to resist the attempt to say much more about this, because the maritime law goes much further. We would have to look then how it's with rivers or lakes, or how it's with maritime law on the land. It has all its strong references. But I want to point to something else now, to little details that you could overreach easily. So it's joyful for me if you can point to those things, and someone else is empowered to be in the able to look, I found this somewhere else, and he really then gets what he can see here. So what we see here on one hand is, but I just want to talk about it in some minutes. You said there's the international sea. That's something that I finally want to relativize. The claim on this of the states is not there, but claim on the sea could in fact be there. And at the same time there's another area, it's Antarctica. Antarctica, there are the Antarctic treaties from the end of the 50s, where internationally people agreed on that Antarctica cannot be entered by nations. The explanation is that the plant and animals there shouldn't be disturbed. But the special thing is that the USA had already had claims to Antarctic, like the German Empire with a new Schwabenland. And those claims had been published then, and they put their flags there, dropped the flags there from the airplanes. But interestingly, that had been given up. And all nations agreed on that they don't question that. And I want to give this as a clue that leads to a very deep level, much deeper, and as a clue to an issue where I normally don't speak about it. You maybe said this once, but this is only a little excerpt. You could talk much more about that, and maybe a clue for those who want to research. Admiral Byrd, had many expeditions and uncovered many things, and amongst that he had made an excursion to the Antarctic, and he reported on that on television. And you see this recording also on the internet, I think from the year 1957 or 58, and Admiral Byrd said that there's no other continent on Earth, no other country that would be so rich as Antarctic, and that he drilled there, and that they found everything that can be found there in such a concentrated form as nowhere else on the world. Gold, oil, coal. And he says he deals with that in the next months. All nations on the world would go into a competition to claim Antarctic. But what really happened is that sometime later all nations on the world agreed on this area to make it total no man's land. That's a clue, a very interesting chapter with many not undangerous further recognitions. That's a taboo that needs to be addressed. And here we realize at once that the outer space, other than Antarctic, seems to raise seems the interest, like there's here an administrator of exploiting space. So since 50 years, this international consensus about that no nation can claim space for them. But a new U.S. law questions that now. It declares the USA to the claim license. They have about licenses again. Here, road regulations for space. It's like licenses again. And here you can see the system of rights, or the legal system. The legal system are extended into those areas that are not reachable to us. So in other words, even that's not tangible underlies that. That's the message. There are two other hints. Please show the picture again. It looks like Saturn planet. We see the Saturn ring, and if you hold it high, hold it up, you see the space, the text space, unlimited treasures in space, and the source is photo image. It's not a photo. It's an image. There are special agencies that paint planets, but it's no photo. And an image is only something that expresses another quality, like a seeming. And interesting, the Saturn, it looks like Saturn, but it should be Saturn in its quality. Even if it isn't, we don't know it, because we don't know anyway how Saturn looks. We only get shown pictures that are painted, so we can say a little about if it's Saturn. But it's this ring, and this has also a meaning. So, if you like, you can research on here. Let's conclude this issue, almost, because this issue indirectly, this news belongs there too. When we abolish the borders, then we would have to deal with that the people that define their own power structure over their borders could become rebels, and this is incredible news. Military police raids NATO center in Warsaw. The Polish government took the control of a NATO-entrusted espionage defense center. So here's the news of the Welt magazine, and the German federal government is criticizing this. So the internationally under heavy criticism standing Polish government, and here they reported this government is to be criticized. On Friday, by NATO entrusted espionage defense center was raided to take on control. Officers of Ministry of Defense and military police would have after midnight entered the Polish-Slovakian center, the boss states. I said that your presence here is illegal, he said. After the raid, the police would have sealed the doors. And this is what was said, and the doors were sealed, and now they have a contemporary boss there put in place, so they restored control in a point where they had granted everyone control up until now, so they could do anything behind closed doors. And the NATO is very present in Poland. So Poland is a country that they set much on, and now this structure, this agency, at once is constrained in its power, and this is an interesting hint. Let's see what happens there, because if I would accept that, that's a big question. But don't remember, it's all on stage, all playing on stage. But maybe this theater play is not so clear as how it goes. Maybe there will come surprises, and I'm really sure that we will see some surprises. This is extraordinary news of the last days. Yeah, and here are some news from me. Yeah, I don't have so much. America's newest battleship havarizes when it went from the harbor. It's an example for the military power of the USA. So in Milwaukee, according to Navy Times, at 11th of December, a new battleship had to turn around in the open seas because they didn't know what the damage was or what the problem was. That's an example for that technology sometimes plays its tricks. If you set your powers on the strongest weapons or define yourself by that. So here are two news from Israel that are quite interesting and give us some views. Israel authorities have the month of within 1 month they arrested 1,200 Palestinian children. So children that here are in Israel, the Palestinian children got into prison for years. And in Israel, also the reconstruction in Gaza Strip is not wanted. Israel has prohibited the import of concrete for Gaza Strip, so here they can exercise power by that. We see everywhere in the world structures that obviously show that finally the house right is valid and the right of the stronger. And everyone here can judge and see for themselves how we at the same time are disarmed. And that's a big subject. So our possibilities to defend our own space are not only being taken from us, but now it's getting conscious to us that those borders are not there anymore, and who wants to defend them is punished with full hardness of the dominating structures. So there's an ex-CIA agent, Robert Baer, said they gave us millions to destroy Yugoslavia. And it's an example for where we through an agency, CIA is an agency, they said they gave us millions to destroy Yugoslavia. And they destroyed, they explained furthermore whether those national movements in the USA, in Yugoslavia that had been so dangerous that we would have to fight them. No, they were so so meaningless that we created this confrontation ourselves for destroying it. And we know, or the older ones know, what in this time was going on, but this was created. I want to point to that basically this dismembering of states is to be found everywhere. You don't have to look to Cyprus or North Korea, but it's over centuries everywhere that not only borders shift, but countries disappeared and reappeared or have been newly created. And with this, in a certain way, a new power structures is created. New powers are created, and we experience such a break and this shift with an extreme radicalness in a time where the singular person hasn't gotten this, and many people still don't get this. But Yugoslavia is a good example where the NATO was put in place to create certain structures. And it's a prolonged arm of the according structures that on this part had been called, that had been put in place. Yeah, I don't know, what do you have still? I have some news. You can judge demands U.S. Marshals and FBI to arrest Congress and President and so on. The Alaska State Judge Anna von Reitz has sent an open letter federal agents to U.S. Marshals that they should arrest Congress, President and Secretary of Treasury, and gives details why these are criminals. Yeah, but here's total something she doesn't know, or people don't know, what you haven't read, but she didn't know that everything that's U.S. is always company. Whenever U.S. is standing there, there's always a company in it. So the marshals, real U.S. marshals really are working for the United States. And the United States, U.S. is always the company. She would have to address the sheriffs in the singular states. So it's not one state even. If you ask Americans how many states are there, they say 50. 48 plus 2, Hawaii and Alaska. Then we have the 50 states, but really it's not 50 but 100 states, and those 100 states you can clearly see. So there's California state and state of California. And on the one hand we have California state, that's the state California, and the state of California, that's the company and its agency, the agency. And there are courts in the USA, they are still national, that are national courts by the California state, and there are more courts that belong to those corporate structures. And the normal citizen cannot distinguish between those. And this makes the research easier in the USA, because those structures really expressively are present in this form. And this makes it a little bit more easy, but it's at the same time an incredible terrifying what's connected to that, if you really realize that the things that you have heard already become visible in this form in front of our all eyes, unoverseeable. Okay, so to say that always when US is standing there, we are in the company, and the judge also too, this isn't working. So if you would have to address the national structures, there's America, not United States of America, of California, or District of Columbia. There we have those structures, but you would have to address to America. But it's interesting that she questions what's going on there. Yeah, and there had been one interesting other hint that came up by this. And the one or the other one. And there's another news: helping makes happy. Who helps others does himself good things. Helping, willingness to help, serves health, well-being, and the own. Helping makes happy. Is this a happy bug? No. It's dead or not unhealthy bug. A bug lies on the back, can turn around if he lives. But this is strange that they sell us a lucky bug, a dead lucky bug. So here we have a obvious hint. I could make a derivation to the zombies, and the dead play an important role.
Gut.
My last two issues lead to what's notable and worth to be mentioned here. If we look at the plants that are running. So, if you see what happens here, creates a big change, the effects of which we cannot estimate, but we realize, there will be effects. And which effects it will be, we don't know. But those that give hints that those effects would be challenging or even dangerous, those are being ridiculed. They are forbidden to speak. So these are which effects you have to expect, into which direction will this go. And this news I brought here, I want to bring it now. Someone sent it to us, I don't know from which newspaper. It's in action that happens in the towns, in the cities. The action leaves. I don't know. Read. The Quran is to be can be read in German in the name of the Lord that created you. So read. Yeah. So Quran stands are belonging to the in every city. We see the Quran. You can donate or get one donated. So you can say in other words that the Quran and the Islam is such accordingly will play an even bigger role. And if we it had been said to us every time by Gauck, President, by Merkel, that Quran and Islam belongs to Germany. If we look how in many other areas of the world basically always is made chaos, then the so-called religious wars appear. If we see in England, at Ireland, or look into Iraq or to Afghanistan, everywhere we find such so-called religious wars. In Europe, where the majority Christians live, religious wars are very hard to cause, and the story of religious wars that they offer as explanations to the outside, that's difficult. You can not easily say that the Protestants and the Catholics would fight each other in Germany, and that's a farce, and the Protestant Church has submerged to the Catholic Church, and it's only a part of that, but it's another aspect. So we have no basis for religious wars in this country, but this is now being constructed, and it's constructed by splitting a society on a part where understanding non-understanding replaces knowledge. And this is not only done here, but also in the USA, and here it's about in New York. The first Muslim judge at sworn to the Quran. Sworn in with the Quran. And this is like a declaration of war for the valid law in the USA, they write. And it's in contrast to the Western legal system with the Sharia. And with expressly in New York and in Bonn, law students tries to do the same. So what we can see here is a change that should split society, and that is that the society should get a different picture of the religion, and this picture can easily be made. So we are prepared on a new divide and conquer with old structures that everyone can watch since centuries and millennia. And I want to remind that we, in context with the attacks in Paris, we have the 13th of the date that is strongly in context with the Crusades. We addressed that, and here are structures running. We are seeing preparations that in many parts only become recognizable when we see what they do with that. At least if we don't open our eyes on time. Yeah, we have to see those are old plans to have a world government or a world religion, and for this all old order structures are destroyed. That's so that the new world order can come. Order from chaos, what the lodges say. Here we have another news as in addition to that, now the EU should fight. France asks Europeans for military support, so here a war is led, and it's the preparation for a religious war, even if they pretend to the outside to be tolerant. This tolerance sometime not only will find its end, but find change into a totally exaggerated religious war. And here they clearly have many innocent victims alone through their affinity to a certain group who don't deal with that. So it's easy to create chaos. They create much suffering, that they can create chaos. Those background forces, they've shown it, but they haven't shown that they can create a better world, a better order. They would have to prove it at first, and I have big doubts, because what I've seen up until now is that they have only shown that they can create chaos. And I want to say that they don't have to this, so I don't want to have a new world order, and I don't want to see it, because no human being has the right to construct a world for other ones, and that another one has to live. But it's about that we can find our own freedom back, but this freedom cannot be achieved if not before the unfreedom wouldn't have been tasted. So if you think you're free every time, then you cannot recognize if you're free. But if you recognize your unfreedom, and it's presented, not only presented, but prepared for us in every facet, then the illusion of a pseudo-freedom can not hold, not remain with those who now seem to live freely in ordered relations. But this illusion is just dying. Can you, on the other hand, say that what happens at the moment, this whole chaos in the world, that this basically serves to that people awake, so that basically in the consciousness change plays a role? Yes, without constraints. You could say even that is the prerequisites. It's needed. Those two polarities are needed in their friction, so that you could say in this part everyone could find his place. At which polarity you're at home. Those two poles are not good or bad. They just ask, where does your energy float to? Can we make it with our explanations and models to lure you into a pseudo-energy that in reality is from a totally different source, and you're satisfied by replacement? Come to us, you get power. Come to us, you get a new power, a new car, a hybrid car. Come to us, you get this and that. come to us, you get the super DVD player with 14 channel sound. Or do you realize that all this, in reality, is something that should distract you, and this distraction has to be seen through. And this distraction works wonderfully when we always again are being sent energetically into those areas where we can move without danger, but where it gets interesting for us, it gets either too complicated or they explain it as being too complicated or at least unimportant, but there we have to look. And if not voluntarily, then through friction. So the getting conscious of this situation is the prerequisite for us that to deal better with the situation, or other would deal with us and exercise power over us. At the beginning we talked about Star Wars, but it's interesting that in the Star Wars movies it's said that some few people have the Force in them, but the Force is everywhere. And it's explained in some beings or people it's very strong, and they say the Force is strong in Luke Skywalker or Princess Leia or whoever. The Jedi Knights, they utilize the Force. These are interesting hints, true hints, because in these films we see the fascist structures of the Empire with the stormtroopers. In the new movie, I haven't seen it. It should be so that one of the stormtroopers starts to question for which system he stands in. I haven't seen it. I have only read a little bit about it. Would be interesting. So there's also questioned. Things are questioned. We have, when I can say it, Joe, I'm not knowing the Star Wars films. I've seen only excerpts, but I will see them. I will watch them. There are many productions that have very interesting details, and it's paying off to watch them from a different perspective. Certain movies, Star Wars could be fall into this category. I really believe that. What I know are those very strong contrasts in black and white with the warriors that are shown there. It's very known pictures of certain power structures also there, but it contains wisdom that in our world normally are being kept secret in what you said. So what you just said, while you spoke, I really thought if I should say what I want to say now, because it's something that's absolutely not wanted in those times. You could say the Force is inherited. I don't want to say more to this. You could misinterpret this totally, but Force inherits. And this so given on from generation to generation. This doesn't fit into the statement that we are all equal. And this could, if this is really recognized, realized, this can become a threat. And in Star Wars there's Anakin, who seems to have inherited this Force, or there are Jedi who cultivate that and, like a cult, transport the spiritual secret knowledge. And there's black and white, and there's a Senate and interstellar Senate, and there's a Chancellor who is still very dark, but appears very friendly, and all applaud him. How many people are in the Senate? I don't know. I will take a look at that. I will, when there's time, look at the newest edition of Star Wars, maybe the other ones before. You should actually watch the whole, all parts, so it's interesting what's in there. So I don't know if it was made so successful, but yeah, and it's a war as a central subject in that. And there's much in that, and it shows basically in a very distinct way much truth, but in a way that can be overseen easily. And it's good the way it is, because what's to be found can be found by the one who wants to find it, because he needs prerequisites to find it. So, like hints in movies, you can only see them if you know something before or are conscious for that, what's maybe shown there, and then it can be very interesting to look closely into such films. What you see there's little hints, and there's a situation where maybe a victory is there, and the Jedi Knights realize that it's not a victory, but it's the start of a further conflict. So you can see it all from distance and the things behind that. But we don't want to talk about Star Wars. We are shortly before Christmas, so it's beautiful to say when he says the power is strong in you, but we can empower ourselves by not giving power to others through our recognition, our acknowledgement, recognition. So you said we have the power to reclaim our force. And I want to say what I pointed to at the beginning, to give the hint that at the moment we can watch that many things that are happening now are happening very hectically, in a hurry. And this hurry is unoverseeable, so you could see all approaches one very big climax, and this development accelerates. And this is accelerating in us and ourselves too, and it's challenging. And I want to give some hints about that also on the physical level. We haven't done it for a longer time, but it fits well at the moment. So I want to point to at the start that this hurry is no expression of sovereignty, of having things in the hand, but it's more an expression of desperation. So they try to organize things still as they are planned and intended, but the counter movement here is so obvious, becomes so obvious that we can see it so obvious in the outer world, because it's hidden, like a sheet hang in front of that, so that you shouldn't see what happens. It also happens at the Christmas time, some families, they hang something in front of the door so that people cannot look through the window what's there happening in the Christmas room. And many things are also hidden from us that otherwise would make us even more hope for what happens at the moment. And that's an important hint. This hope has not only its justification, but everything happens as it should happen. There's much said in prophecies, and also in the Bible there's the hint that the worlds would separate. And in the last show you gave me a DVD from a TV show. It's a film where from the plane at once, in the moment, and there people are vanishing at once. And this is in the Bible, like two words are parting. Yeah. Is this for you an option that there are parallel worlds or timelines, or that the worlds would separate into a world where that goes into the one direction and the one in the other direction? Is this no option for you? It's for me an absolute option when we speak of the first part that you said, that there are parallel worlds. You could also say that this question is not putting for myself, because I have had touch with parallel worlds, if you want to say. And these are no fantasy worlds, so no imagined dream worlds or illusionary worlds, but it's what you touch when you speak about frequency shifts, that's what we did in the past, also in Russia, in Siberia. There was a time in that it was forbidden to possess a shamanic drum, because a shamanic drum is a tool to travel into another world. And this other world makes things more understandable that seem to happen in this world. And what we experience is very strongly connected with another changed perception, and this leads us, in my understanding, not out of this world totally, but shows just up that this is just one world in which we more or less voluntarily are kept in certain energetical structures. If we don't give those energetical structures any energy, then those structures don't have more power over us, because they need our energy, just like with a pyramid in the circus, where below the artists stand that are the strongest ones, and when they go, the pyramid collapses, and this hits it very well, what our artificial structure relations are here and that we are now. So from there, for me, it's a way that can be gone in different ways. At one hand, in the outer story, where we realize in the dream itself that we dream, and where we realize that in our dream others seem to influence our dream, that inside of our dream we can shift between someone who plays a role in the theater play or sits in the stands and watches the play, and that this theater play gains great dynamics, and that we, through our attention, decide where energies flow. And at the moment there are many energetical flows that demand much attention, if wanted or not, that can go hand in hand with physical exhaustion, and it belongs to that we have procedures in ourselves that we still have to supply energetically, that demand effort from us energetically, that can happen in sleep or in thoughts. And it's important to find back to the true relevant things, and this is a clue I'd like to say more about that, how this can go. For the last energies of the days of this year, number 83 in 2015, you said some physical hints. Yeah, physical hints are, for example, also issues that have to do with the heart, with the circulation more than until now, and with exhaustion. It has to do with creation and with making. And Merkel says we will make that. Of whom does she speak? Not for me. And if she wants to make something, she wants to create something. But the question is, if we want to support that, what she wants to make there. And in many parts we realize those energetical powers are becoming tangible for us. So if you sense your heart, or if you are exhausted, I recommend you to allow to get into a little rest sometime. And this rest, with all that knocks on the door or wants to be created, is the true polar equalization for the strong energy that's still demanded from you. We have many things that want to come up still, that want to be freed up in us and demand energy, but very less on those parts where they present it to us, where they say, there you have to go, but these are more the powers in ourselves. And the prerequisites are silence and to agree on going into silence. This is important. You said this has to do with creation, and there are shows where it's about that we become conscious creators. So this means I should not use my creation power to provide it to the system, or my recognition and attention to give it away, but to create my own things, my own creation, whatever this is. So I came here. I would say it in a different way. You are at an important point now. It's very close to what I wanted to say, but I want to say it in a different way. You said the creative energy, to put it not so much into the structures of the system, but into our own creation. I would more say to recognize your own creation, not to necessarily create something new, to bring your own creation into the world, but more like to what creates out of yourself, because creation is already there. It can be misunderstood to say, well, don't give that much energy into the system, bring something own into the world, do music, whatever. Yeah, that's beautiful, cool, that's good, that has its place. And it may be your way to put your energy into the world, but I would step one step even more back. So what is it that is created through you, really and truly, without that you mean permanently to have to do something, and at once something happens through you? What your own powers empowers them again, without the structures that others impose on you or pre-defined for you with their power. So the self-expression, and with self I mean not the personal, the ego impression, and the self that I really am, that here is this being that had incarnated here, that's the self, and it wants to express itself in a certain way. Yeah, I would even say something else. What has incarnated here is already form, for a very big part. The self is what provides energy for the form. So if you want, what lets Joe be alive is the self. And what you see in the form, that's subdued to permanent changes, that gets older, that gets ill or healthy, is frustrated or in a good mood, or full of hope, or full of devotion, or full of anger. That's wonderful. That's all expressions that are nourished from the self, forms of your being, and to find what is that brings this all into the world. That's what stays persistent. When you are subdued to permanent changes, when you draw conclusions from the outer structures. So the viewing to the inside, to find the being, to find inside of you the being that radiates to the outside, that shines through the outside, from you, like the authenticity in the true form. You are what you you are real in the what you are. So in the moment we are faked, we are not real. We are people that are being directed according to criteria that others maybe have invented. Yeah, and maybe you feel well in some parts of this. But it's not a question about where do you feel well, but what am I really? Who am I really? And what am I not? And if you search that, then it's the way that leads you to your true nature. And nothing is feared more than when a true human being knows his true nature. Very beautiful words, and I want to conclude that with that we have find a senseful Christmas and experience an interesting year 2016. We will see great change. Not everything will be good. Don't go into unrest. It happens because it must happen. Look where you can express yourself, where you can take time for yourself and let things happen, and don't get into unrest. I think there will be we will overstand change very well. And what you see is unoverseeable, a conclusional word for me, but still explain me to say a practical exercise. I want to add to that. It's very important. It's always conveyed to us that there are important moments in our life that are of central meaning. These are often moments that are predefined for us. So, for example, you do your high school degree, or you go to the army, or you marry. So, on those parts, In those moments you find the structural elements and components of the system. But your life is in every actual moment, every time meaningful, and this meaningfulness is to be found at those parts where you don't expect it. So, for the viewers, find at the moment the relevant things where others don't realize it. So you find a little thing that's something incidental, something irrelevant that you like happens automatically, like cooking tea or cleaning shoes, and if you devote your attention to that as if there would be nothing more important. And by doing that, you get much more in touch with it, just because it's normally so irrelevant. But you can put your energy into everything that happens in the here and now. Thanks, Alexander, and Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas and a great New Year.